Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Welcome all you brothers and sisters, friends and neighbors, friends and family, whoever you are, wherever you are, citizens of the world. Welcome to another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. I am Michael James. I am here in Chicago. We're recording this via Zoom from Chicago's Fighting 49th Ward. And a little bit later, we're going to have one of our best pals and sometimes host of the show and a producer of the show, Thom Clark, on. And then we're going to have Corky Siegel, who will be celebrating his 80th birthday with a special concert. Longtime viewers of the show know that periodically when we try to do it on air and stream, we've had technical troubles. I remember the days at the Heartland Cafe when we would jump up from the stage where the show was about to be recorded and broadcast, and we'd go over to Loyola to the studio, which was then up in Rogers Park, and do the show from there. For a number of years, we did it downtown at the studios on Pearson. And with the pandemic, we've been doing it via Zoom, which really allowed us to talk to people all over the world. And we like that, but sometimes we have trouble hooking up. Last week, after a number of weeks of problems, we were on air. And hopefully this one will be on air, as well as CAN TV, youtube.com/heartlandmedia, etc. I'm focused on Rising Up Angry, an organization that I helped to start in 1969. Right after this show, I'm heading to a reunion of Rising Up Angry members and supporters. And I'm glad to say that my newest book, Rising Up Angry, will be out hopefully when you're listening to this show. And we are going to have a book reading and book signing put on by the Roman Susan Gallery people at Burger Park, 7 o'clock on November 20th. So I'll be there with books and I'll do a reading and we'll have some discussion. Okay, some not so good things going on in the world. We've got war in Israel. We've got war in Ukraine. We've got famine in Africa. And we have an outbreak of resistance in Guatemala. Here in Chicago, the conditions with arriving migrants and the issues and concerns it has caused have led some Chicagoans to question our sister city relationship, our sister country relationship, and really take a pretty negative stand about these future friends, neighbors, and voters here in Chicago with a kind of not in my backyard, sowing the seeds of not in my backyard. We don't want immigrants in our community. Some of it is justified because a lot of people were promised things for a number of years, didn't get them, and now resources are being put into the migrant crisis, while other people have been waiting a long time for some attention are still waiting. So I understand the contradiction. It's a challenge. We have to figure out how to go forward. Let's take a quick peek at Israel, which we'll probably talk about with our guest, Thom Clark. But I did see in the New Yorker a quote that I found interesting. You know, many of you who listen to the show know we've been pretty critical of Israel as an apartheid state and its treatment of Palestinians. That doesn't mean we can't be grieving and very critical of the latest state of affairs. I did see in the New Yorker talked about Israel with a foreign policy that has been keyed to annexation and dispossession, and that ignored the existence and rights of Palestinians. Mother Jones reported an interview with Matt Duss, D-U-S-S, a former top foreign policy aide to Bernie Sanders. It appeared in Politico. And I think he sums it up pretty well. There is no justification for attacking civilians, for slaughtering civilians, for kidnapping elderly people in wheelchairs. He went on to say, if we believe in human dignity, if we believe in international law, I think we need to condemn that unequivocally. That does not mean we can't have a deeper conversation about the context of the situation, Israel, Palestine. We have to have that conversation. But I think the way into that conversation has to be very clear about principles of civilian protection and very clear on how disgusting this violence is. Taking a little look in our own hemisphere over down in Guatemala, there's rising tensions in Guatemala, protests by supporters of President-elect Bernardo Arevalo They've run into the second week. Protesters are demanding the resignation of the Attorney General. Her last name is Consuelo Porras. They accuse Ms. Porras of plotting to prevent Mr. Arevalo, who has promised to fight corruption, from taking office. Some of the protests just turned violent after a week of peaceful protests, and it turns out that these are agent provocateurs, probably from the existing government, who threw stones and broke windows at a demonstration outside the National Palace of Culture in the capital, Guatemala City. On the labor front, a lot of strikes going on. United Auto Workers is in the fourth week of their strike. My union, SAG-AFTRA, is still on strike. I did see a headline that said Hollywood strike stings Warner Brothers. Profit outlook for the year trimmed by as much as $500 million. And here in Chicago, we're home base to Walgreens, well, a suburb. I saw this today. It said employees of two of the largest drugstore chains, that would be Walgreens and CVS, say harsh working conditions make it difficult to safely fill prescriptions, which could put the health of their customers at risk. Now they are demanding change by staging a series of walkouts across the country. And CNN reported that a coalition of unions representing thousands of Kaiser Permanente health workers have warned that they will walk off the job again next month if a deal is not reached with their employers. Taking a look at the U.S. Congress, not so good. On Wednesday, the Republicans put up Steve Scalise as their nominee for Speaker of the House. He will go up probably against Jim Jordan a little bit. I'm not sure how it's going to work, but the Republicans seem divided. And let's be really clear, Jim Jordan knew about the plans that Trump had for January 6th. I mean, this guy is he's really terrible. You know, when he was an assistant coach in wrestling at Ohio State, there was some kind of a little bit of a scandal around sexual harassment, and a number of, I think, 5 wrestlers went to him and reported on it. He denies all of it. So this is one evil guy that we're talking about having possibly be in line to the presidency. Okay, on the good front, Loyola University, our home base is WLUW 88.7, Loyola University's wonderful station. They're on pace right now to be totally solar at the university by 2025. They announced that the university has signed an agreement in partnership with Constellation to purchase power from a new solar project under development in Sangamon and Morgan counties in Illinois. That's a good one. We're happy about that. Also good, Blackhawks won their home opener. The Bears won a week ago on Thursday, and we'll see how they do coming up again. And the Bulls are about to start playing some ball, and records were set in both the men's and women's marathon this past Sunday in Chicago. If you missed last week's show, we had Marilyn Katz on talking about teaching about Fred Hampton's life in Chicago public schools. We also talked a little bit about Israel before the current crisis in Palestine, Israel has broken out. And we also had Johnny Bergen, who is playing on the 21st at the Skokie Theater. And we talked to him in Japan. And both of those you can find at youtube.com/heartlandmedia. You can find them either solo or the whole show. I think that's going to be it for our little bit of opening banner. And we will be right back after a little musical break with our first guest, Thom Clark. All right, everybody, stay tuned here on the left end of your dial. Welcome back to more Live from the Heartland. I'm Michael James here in Chicago, and it really brings me a lot of pleasure, honestly and truly, to bring in our next guest, the one and only Thom Clark, who many of you know has been a host on this show, a co-producer of the show, and someone that I like to go to for information because he thinks out a lot of stuff and has a lot to share. And we've been talking about him coming on for a while. He's involved in this race and equity project, which he'll tell us about. But given the status of the world and the crisis that is unfolding in the Middle East, as well as some stuff right in our face here at home, we're going to talk about a few things first. So without further ado, as some people used to say, hi, Thom, how are you?
Good day to you, Michael. I'm doing fine, thank you.
Good to see you, brother. Well, we're going to talk about the Race and Equity Project, which you have been involved with and want to share about. But the news hit us last week pretty heavy, what's unfolding in the Middle East. We've been longtime supporters of a better deal for Palestinian people, but the horrendous killing of civilians and stuff has really shaken up a lot of people. What's your take on Israel-Palestine conflict these days? How do we get into this mess?
Well, as I reflected with some of my family some 50 years ago when I was a junior at Loyola's Rome Center, I took off a semester early and actually spent 2 weeks on a kibbutz in northern Israel. As a practicing Catholic, also got to visit the Holy Land and was very well treated by the settlers in that pretty small kibbutz. Felt I had studied up on Israel, and this is like 3 years after the Six-Day War, which was still very much fresh in people's mind. And, our friends both here and in Israel refer to this as their 9/11. It's clearly been a shock what Hamas did. But I think as I review the media coverage, I've also been shocked at how one-sided the coverage has been, because there's a long arc of history behind this conflict. And while I'm not making any excuses for Hamas and their horrific actions, similar actions have been taking place by the government, not by Israelis themselves, but by the government, particularly in regards to the West Bank, as well as isolating the Gaza Strip. There are international agreements that Hamas once agreed to create a two-state solution to this ongoing historical 100 years old battle over who owns that piece of land. And the fact is, many faiths have a legitimate hold on that piece of land, as well as the Dome of the Rock itself, which has been the probably immediate cause, along with the actions of the current government, for this current conflict. And I don't know how we're going to get out of it, because now there are massive civilian casualties happening across the Gaza Strip in the name of retaliation. And I don't think retaliation ever gets us very far. And certainly civilians get caught up in it, whatever side they might have been on. They're not combatants. UN today suggested that Israel has already committed some war crimes in the cutting off electricity, food, and medicine for hospitals that were already poorly supplied because of the de facto blockade of the Gaza Strip for many years now. So I find myself thinking about the ongoing conflict in Northern Ireland, which everyone thought was irresolvable, with the IRA killing British soldiers and vice versa. And yet a Good Friday Accord was finally negotiated there, thanks to President Clinton and his agent, George Mitchell. And I guess I'll leave with a rhetorical. I don't know who our George Mitchell is going to be today to help resolve this, because the sides seem to be pretty well entrenched, both within that land itself, as well as our government's response. The European Union's response seems to be a little more split in terms of recognizing the rights of Palestinians to survive. And I just think the next few days and weeks are going to be very brutal for both sides, because I don't see anyone quite giving in and ready to shake a hand of peace, which is really what is called for right now.
You know, I think it's going to be a setback for a better deal for Palestinians. I mean, I think that was sort of on the horizon. Things were moving in a good direction. I think that's really on the back burner right now. I did at the beginning of the show read a quote from Matt Duss, D-U-S-S, who was a political aide to Bernie Sanders, where at the end he said, he says, that does not mean we can't have a deeper conversation about the context of the situation, Israel, Palestine. We have to have that conversation. But I think the way into that conversation has to be very clear about principles of civilian protection and very clear on how disgusting this violence is.
I couldn't agree more. A short story. I was so incensed at what I saw as one-sided coverage on the initial Saturday night coverage on WGN, which I watch all the time. I wrote the reporter and explained my position, my history, my general knowledge of what's going on both sides. And she actually wrote back and thanked me for my comments and apologized for not deliberately showing bias, but in the moment of deadline reporting, didn't know much about the other side. And so I have fed her information since from our colleague Marilyn Katz, who you had on last week, and others, Ray Hanania. And I don't know what she's going to do with that, but she again thanked me for each dispatch I sent her. And it just reminded me that particularly younger reporters covering this have editors kind of framing the story for them, and they may not know better about the history that you and I have lived with so long and have maybe studied a bit more than some people. And it's, the lesson I took from this is don't yell at the TV, do something about it. And
I yell at the TV a lot.
but I think maybe we need to write letters more often and see what kind of a response we can get from the reporters and editors who are covering the news for us.
Yeah, I'm not going to belabor it, but I was kind of amazed at how I think the news has even turned more to a totally pro-Israel stance, which I can understand given we learned more about the violence and how it came down. But initially, I found the only place I saw anything that even raised the historical issues was MSNBC, and I haven't seen much of that for the last few days.
Well, I'm afraid I agree with you, and we'll see how much of a bigger story evolves over time. But I again recall 9/11, which is the illusion or the metaphor that many Israelis are using right now. There was tremendous anti-Muslim sentiment right after that horrific act of terror. And, I think that has dissipated over time, but it's not disappeared. We have a former president who began his election campaign on the premise that we should get rid of all Muslims. And I'm not paraphrasing too much when I say that. So we have these tensions beyond just the land of Palestine and what the Israeli government might be doing about it right now, that we need to all be looking at how we move beyond that kind of conflict and disdain for other peoples and begin to represent basic humanity.
Tom, I'm going to switch gears here because I'm sure we're going to be talking about the Middle East every show for a while. Let's bring it home to Chicago, where we've long been a welcoming city. We've welcomed immigrants from all over the world. We've continued to do that. But all of a sudden, we have certain aldermen starting to question our sister city relationship, our sister country relationship. We have talk of putting migrants in tents. We have people in certain communities basically sowing seeds of not in my backyard, without really being clear that they have been deprived of some promises about better schools, better housing, things in their neighborhood. What's your take on the migrants coming to Chicago and the reaction to it here in the city?
Well, we now have had over 17,000 migrants arrive since last year. And that means the problem is close to doubling since Mayor Johnson took over. He did take over a situation that the former mayor had not really prepared the city very well for. If we had been doing something last spring, we maybe could have rehabbed some of the empty buildings around town to provide the kind of housing, which certainly is one suggestion Alderman Vasquez, for instance, has made. But we have an immediate problem right now with over 2,000 people, again, in police stations, sleeping on the floor, sleeping in tents outside police stations, and it's getting colder. I'm not even sure that they can get tents up that quick, if that's the solution. which I don't particularly agree with, particularly with the company that got hired to do it. Um, and to be honest, I blame uh, the administration for being a little flat-footed, but also relying on the state that originally signed the contract with this firm that has a shady past, by my estimation. So I think that Brandon Johnson has an almost insurmountable issue to overcome in a few short weeks before we start seeing freezing migrants out on the street. And that's not to count the existing homeless and other folks who are doubling up, who aren't officially called homeless, because the city clearly has a significant affordable housing issue that's exacerbated by the ever increasing cost of rent, and for that matter, home ownership, which is just spiraling. The mayor is making his budget statement as we speak today, and we'll see how he's going to resolve fulfilling some of the promises he made. Although I've begun to hear a lot more talk about you can't solve everything in 1 year's budget. I have 4 to work with. So I don't think supporters of the mayor are going to be entirely happy with what they hear in his budget statement. He has a now $500 million deficit to to somehow fill in, and 200 million of that is what the migrant crisis has cost the city so far. Totally unbudgeted, unprepared for, and it's not clear without further help from the state or the feds how we're going to fill that gap. Ultimately, on the migrant issue, this is a cry out for the need for comprehensive immigration reform, which we've been talking about for 10 or 20 years now. And that means some of these Republican governors need to sit down with the other side, which they don't seem to be capable of doing, and working out some compromise, particularly on work rules, to let the folks who came hundreds and thousands of miles for a better life to actually get to work and bolster our economy and earn enough money to buy more than a tent outside a police station.
Let me ask you this. I heard someone the other day talk about how 20,000 people came from Ukraine after the war started to Chicago. I haven't seen any of that talked about, but how they got incorporated, if that number is true or even if it's smaller. But we had a lot of people coming from the Ukraine, and I think that there probably is an established Ukrainian community that would have helped absorb that. Do you have any insight on that or any awareness around that?
Well, there are some Ukrainian pockets. In fact, our state representative, Mike Quigley, was chair of a caucus representing Ukrainians, and he was a single vote in a piece in Congress. So 2 weeks ago, single Democrat who voted against that particular continuing resolution because it didn't deal with funding further support of Ukraine. So there's a significant Ukrainian population here. And yes, I don't know what the numbers are. 20,000 sounds high, but it could have reached that. But I know people who were doing one-on-one help, families of 3 or 4 supporting one family at a time to get settled. And that's wasn't just with Ukrainians. It was happening also with Afghanis and other migrants, if you will, from other war-torn areas. So our city, in fact, has had a history. And for those who don't want us to continue that kind of welcoming city thing, it's not in our history. It's not really in our genome, I think, to reject folks who come to our shores of Lake Michigan to try to make a better life for themselves.
Well, yeah, we're going to be watching this. I'm sure we'll be involved in some ways.
I appreciate, I'll say that, if your kids' soccer practice is taken away because a field house has been turned over to emergency migrant centers, why you're going to be upset. And it's hard for people, parents in that particular situation, to maybe take the long view. But the city is hard pressed. I'm afraid they've been a little flat-footed so far in their moves to kind of cope with a unplanned crises. I don't mean that as a criticism, except I think some more creativity needs to be coming forward, as well as definitely more resources from somewhere.
Well said. Yeah, I was really glad when our governor basically questioned the idea of the tents, not just because of tents and coal, but partly because of who the company is that's been doing the busing from Texas and Florida, those kind of places. How about we switch gears here?
Sure.
Originally, when I first said time to come on the show, Thom, you were going to talk about race and equity, a project you're involved with, and there was a certain timing issue on that. So here we are. We got the date right, I think. Come on and spill the beans. What's it all about, Thom?
Well, in the last 2 weeks, we have formally launched a project I've been working on for 3 years with a group of other journalists and educators called the Investigative Project on Race and Equity. And what we're trying to do is basically train journalists in data driven reporting and collaborate with news organizations to uncover systemic racism in our society through compelling stories, human interest stories that inform the public discourse and hopefully create change. We feel that's important because an informed populace and policymakers might make better choices about how we solve some of these problems. And in this case, we released a report in conjunction with WBEZ Public Radio, also appearing in the Chicago Sun-Times, on 42 million records that the state has collected from police departments all around the state on traffic stops. Uh, the reason the state was collecting this data is that a young state senator by the name of Barack Obama, in an earlier era, 20 years ago, was trying to stem the tide of what was seen as perhaps prejudicial stops by police. And what's happened in the meantime seems to indicate, as a result of our reporters' analysis, is that the problem really hasn't gone away. In fact, for Black drivers, it's probably gotten worse. Um, the um, the particular findings show that stops involving Black drivers top 30% of all traffic stops statewide. That's up from 17% in 2004. Um, that trend is disturbing, and we have tried to document what might be going on in order that we might be able to find a better solution to what seems to be a particular issue that befalls Black and Latino drivers around the state. This is not just a city of Chicago issue, although we probably have had time to do more particular analysis, and the stories, which are available at WBEZ.org or our own raceandequityproject.org, will give you the links to find the 3-part series and another one coming along. It includes an interactive database where people can look up community by community what their particular statistics are. Again, to try to help not just Chicagoans, but communities around the state figure out if they have a problem, and if so, what they need to do about it.
Why do you think that there have been more stops of Black and Latino drivers? Do we have any indication of what it might be when we have more attention being paid to, people they have dash cameras, they have cameras they wear. There's much more oversight. There's a lot of talk about it. What do you think the causes of the increase in these stops?
Well, that would be conjecture on my part. What the data shows is that there has been an increase in Black drivers being stopped. What's interesting is that probable cause is supposed to be one reason for a traffic stop, but in many cases, even non-moving violations, when analyzed, show far more Black drivers being stopped than, a tail light is out, or you have jiggly dice in your windshield hanging from your rearview mirror. Those are considered non-moving violations, but they seem to have prompted an increase in number of police stops, particularly if you're driving while Black.
You had said something about stop and frisk being outlawed to me in a conversation. Does that relate in any way?
Our report did not address that issue. It could be something that happens down the line as other reporters take a look at our data, or for that matter, other policymakers take a look at the results of our data. Um, the um, the fact is that even beyond the city limits, traffic stops are disproportionately affecting Black drivers. Black drivers only make up 13% of overall drivers, but they make up 21% of all traffic stops throughout the state. Again, this is a statewide issue that we've identified. It's not just particular to Chicago. Um, I will leave it to the policymakers and legislators, as well as the public, uh, to delve into this data further to figure out what some of the solutions might be.
Tom, do you have any more about the project on race and equity? You want to share where it's going, what the plans are?
Well, we're very excited to have finally launched, and we're looking forward to begin offering training programs. We actually hired 3 apprentices to work with our 2 lead reporters and the WBEZ staff to help crunch these numbers. We're very excited we were able to engage these young reporters to teach them some basic investigative skills involving data. We hope to be offering further trainings over the next couple of months. We are very grateful for the funding we've gotten so far. You know, I always have to thank our funders. The Chicago Community Trust gave us a big boost last January with a significant grant. We've also had support from the Joyce Foundation, the Field Foundation, and the Chicago Headline Club. There's no doubt that our affiliate, that the collective experience of the 12 to 14 members of the advisory committee who've really volunteered many hours, meeting almost weekly on Saturday afternoons to pull this effort off. That kind of talent will be contributing to these trainings and to moving the work of this project forward.
Well, we're going to run out of time, but I want to make sure everyone they can go to raceandequityproject.org
Correct.
for more information.
Exactly.
And I'm going to throw one more question at you. What's the latest status of Chicago newspapers? And I guess where I'm going is, what do you think about public radio buying the Sun-Times and the Sun-Times coming out with really some good news and reporting? You got anything you want to share on that?
Well, I think you summed it up rather well. I think that the partnership between WBEZ, Chicago Public Media, and the Chicago Sun-Times is both part of a trend of legacy newspapers turning to the nonprofit business model. It is still an evolving business model. After all, being nonprofit is just a tax status. It's not how you run your business. But I think Chicago readers and viewers and listeners have been enriched by the partnership so far. I think it has helped both those media outlets tremendously. And to be honest, while the Tribune still produces some good reports, I believe the Sun-Times is the more important newspaper now if you want to follow local news.
This has been good, Tom. Is there anything that that's not coming up on your mind you want to share, or you want to say you had enough of me today?
I've always enjoyed talking with you, Michael, and this again has been a very rich conversation. I look forward to listening to your next guest, Corky Siegel. I think is going to be celebrating a little bit of a birthday.
Yeah, he's getting up there. He's going to try to catch up to me.
I would invite people to check out raceandequityproject.org, the investigative project on race and equity, which you can also find on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and a little bit on that thing we used to call Twitter.
I'm looking forward to seeing you around the neighborhood, talking to you more, and know that you're always welcome to host an edition of this show, and you can certainly help write any of the script that you used to do all the time. Now I have to do it. But I appreciate your help and your support. You're a wonderful guy.
Take care, Michael.
Right on. Everybody else, we're going to take a little musical break, and then we're coming back with the one and only Corky Siegel, talking about a big event he's having, kind of in celebration of his own 80th birthday. Be right back. Stay tuned here on the left end of your dial.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland. Once again, I'm Michael James here in Chicago. And our next guest is someone who's been on our show numerous times, but not lately, the one and only Corky Siegel. And he is here via Zoom. We're probably just about a few blocks apart here in the Fighting 49th Ward. How are you, Corky?
Really great. Really great.
You always say you're great. You're great all the time.
Well, my body is starting to have opinions.
I know how that is. I think I got a couple years on you, but one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was an event that is going to happen at City Winery coming up in celebration of your 80th birthday. How about filling us in on some details? Who's playing with you? What you got planned for this birthday party?
Yeah, well, it's a regular gig at the City Winery, and it's with my chamber blues ensemble. And most of them are here in Chicago. One of our players is flying in from LA. And this is a sort of a semi-rare event musically, because chamber blues, the last number of years, we've usually had guest artists with us come and perform with us. And I've rearranged the whole set and wrote a bunch of, chamber music for them. So we're going back, we're doing a lot of our own material, a couple new tunes, but our own material. And it's string quartet, Indian tabla, and blues harmonica, blues piano. A lot of it's instrumental, but there's a bunch of vocals also.
That's nice. So you're going to do this at City Winery, which is at 1200 West Randolph Street. And this is taking place on Sunday, the 22nd.
Right. And thank you.
What time?
7 o'clock, I believe, right, Holly? Yeah, doors open at 5 because it is a dinner facility, and really good food. And the show starts at 7.
Oh, this will be nice.
And we have some special guests in the audience. We're going to have Howlin' Wolf's daughters. We're going to have Little Walter's daughter. I'm going to tell a little story about Little Walter and Howlin' Wolf. A whole bunch of people are flying in from all over. We may have someone flying in from Germany, but I know there's someone flying in from California and Connecticut and all over the place.
Oh, that's great. Well, you mentioned Howlin' Wolf, and I know that you and I were talking recently about a photograph that you had to buy, and it is a picture of you on Howlin' Wolf's knee.
Right.
How about you show us that picture for the people who are viewing it on YouTube and CAN TV? Other people who are listening to the show will just have to take our word for it that there is a very young Corky Siegel sitting on the lap of Howlin' Wolf, along with a few other people. Jim Schwal's there. Who else is in that picture?
Jack Myers. And that's Jack Myers, or my little fingers wiggling. And that's our drummer, Russ Chadwick.
And the late Jim Schwal.
Late Jim Schwal.
And the late Howlin' Wolf, too. Well, that's a wonderful... Where was that picture?
The late Russ and the late Jack.
Well, there's a lot of late people. Where was it taken?
That was taken at the backstage of the Cafe A Go-Go. And my recollection of it was that it was taken with Clayton Thomas. What's his first name from the Blood, Sweat, and Tears?
I don't know it.
Yeah, anyway, he was a lead singer with the Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And I remember him posing, telling me, "Oh, sit on his knee," and and he posed the whole thing. But the guy that actually has credit for taking the photo is Phil Oakes' brother.
Oh, the great Phil Oakes. I had one afternoon during the Berkeley Vietnam Day Committee in 64 or 5, where I was entrusted to hang around with Phil Oakes until he was going to perform. So I just remember being at a lawyer's house up in the hills of Berkeley, hanging out with Phil Oakes. You know, it was great.
I had Phil Oakes had dinner with me one evening.
Well, for the younger people who don't know Phil Oakes, he was a wonderful musician, very political guy. And Well, he's another late great guy.
Focusing on it.
Well, let me ask you this, Corky. You have been involved in this new movie. There's been a couple renditions of it, I think, but there's a movie called Born in Chicago.
Yeah.
And how about telling us a little bit about that movie? Sometimes I get it confused with there was a movie about Porn from the Heart or something that was a Paul Butterfield movie. Some of that overlaps. But
Yeah.
fill us in on the Born in Chicago flick.
Yeah, so the Born in Chicago started out as completely a story about the young white kids in Chicago in the early 60s that fell in love with the blues and ended up being at the feet of the blues masters like Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and Otis Spann and all those guys. And so I'm involved in that story because it involved just a handful of kids. You know, it was definitely Paul Butterfield and Mike Bloomfield, Nick Revenitis, Harvey Mandel, Barry Goldberg, and the Siegel Schwall Band. And my own situation was a little different because they approached the blues masters, all these other guys, in different ways, and sat in with them. And I that's not what happened with me. We never approached them. We were just Jim Schwall and I were looking for somewhere to play. We walked into this place on the south side of Chicago, and the guy said, "What are you doing here?" And we said, "Well," and we were the only white kids anywhere for miles around. And it was in the afternoon, and he said, "Well, set up on the floor. The ladies are coming in this afternoon. You could play for them." So we sat up on the floor, and we played, and he hired us immediately. And I didn't know this. And then he hired us a bass player and a drummer and asked us to play every Thursday night from 9 at night to 4 in the morning. And it was on 43rd and Vincennes. And it ended up being the hangout for all these blues players. So here I am listening to my albums and listening to Howlin' Wolf flying out of the grooves of my album and Muddy Waters and all those guys. And weeks later, here I am on stage playing with their bass players and drummers, and who shows up and sits in with us? Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, Otis Spann, Willie Dixon. One guy comes up and says, "Corky, I'd love to sit in." But he seemed like he was drinking a lot. I want to come back another time. And the audience said, "Hey, let him sit in. That's Little Walter."
Wow.
And it gets worse. I'm thinking, who's Little Walter? And then he hops up on stage and he plays. And I go, "Oh, my God, that's Little Walter." So I was just dipping my little teeny toe into the muddy waters of the blues. And here I am surrounded by these blues masters taking us under their wing and adopting us. And so I was like, as I call myself, an innocent victim of incredible good fortune. So we didn't approach the blues masters. We were just out of nowhere surrounded by them. And we're up on stage with them all night long, every Thursday night.
Wow.
You know?
Do you remember a club called the Blue Flame at 39th and Drexel?
Yeah, I don't think I ever was in
I
it.
used to go there and see Paul Butterfield, and I think he had Howlin' Wolf, some of his guys playing with him.
That's right.
They put down a piece in between the back bar and the bar, and there was a shake dancer. It was quite a scene, but I was like me and whoever I was with were the only white kids there.
Right.
It was a pretty special time, I got to say.
Yeah, and that ended up being Paul Butterfield's band. It was probably Jerome Arnold and Sam Lay, and they were both in Howlin' Wolf before that.
Well, the Born in Chicago movie is really good. I don't know if it's shown anywhere, but can people get it? Is it available?
It's available. You could find it on the internet. It's streaming. And what I could tell you is that basically it's a love story about the white kids falling in love with the blues and loving these blues masters and them returning the love. But now the movie develops as some amazing footage of Muddy and Wolf and Butterfield and Bloomfield, and just some incredible footage. And then there's a lot of interviews, with Bob Dylan, and I think Keith Richards they put back in it, and of course they're interviewing me, and so it's quite amazing that I was able to be part of that.
Corky, before we tell people one more time about your birthday party, I'm gonna ask you to give us a little autobiographical picture. Talk about yourself. Where did you start out? How'd you get into music? Some things that are highlights. We've got a few minutes to kill or to fill up. And I think it would be really good to have a little bit of your own personal information documented on Live from the Heartland.
Okay. Well, I started out trying to learn to play jazz saxophone, and I was having a lot of trouble with it. And I realized I didn't have the particular skills necessary to be a musician, but I really wanted to be a musician. So I found ways of doing it. And this has been a boon to my career, if you want to call it a career. It's been
You've had a great career.
A boon to my experience of playing music, which is a lot of the stuff that I do comes out different because I sort of have to approach it in a different way. And so, I'm writing symphonic music. I have a new symphonic piece. I'm jumping right ahead to the future. I'm working on.
Go back and forth.
Yeah. So anyway, that was what's I started out, and then, as I say, I called myself an innocent victim of incredible good fortune, because I got to play with these blues masters. I got to write with Rado and Ragney, who were writing Hair. We didn't know they were writing Hair, but Jim and I were writing it with them. And then a year later, we found out it's Hair. So we were getting to work with. Then we produced Joni Mitchell's demo tape for Joni Mitchell with Circle Game on it. And just like crazy stuff. Before we were an entity, we were getting to do all that stuff. It was quite amazing. And then Seiji Ozawa comes in 1966 and wants me to play with the Chicago Symphony. And so I get into the symphonic and the classical music thing. But it's nothing that I pursued. It's stuff that just happened to me. And that's sort of, it's like an amazing, and it's still going on today. I got commissioned to write all this symphonic music. I never wrote a piece of music in my life, and I didn't know how. And my first commission was with the San Francisco Symphony to write a piece for Arthur Fiedler in front of 6,000 people at the Civic Auditorium. It's the first piece of music I ever wrote of, any kind of classical style.
What led you to the blues? When you were a younger guy, when I first saw you, I think maybe before, but we mixed up on that. But I remember I was at my first Love-In, whatever it was, in Lincoln Park, and I had come back from Berkeley to work in Joint Community Union in Uptown, and that's where I first saw you play. And you and Schwall were doing blues then, Siegel Schwall Blues Band, it was called.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how you got to that place and that event, maybe.
It's funny because we were never really called ourselves a blues band. It was a Siegel Schwall band, but our music was completely inspired by the blues. But we had talked to each other, and we didn't feel like we had to play the blues. We were just whatever we felt like. But anyway, so, and I remember the being in 1966. I remember you being there because I have a photo with you in it. Out of people who could spot you. And then the thing for me that made me fall in love with it was its simplicity. It was accessible for a musician to learn to play, but it was infinite in the possibilities of expression and emotion. And it's still, blues still stands and sits on the pedestal of what you do to express yourself in music. That is the example, blues. And I don't take anything away from any other form of music. All music is expressive, just as expressive as the blues, but some schools of thought make you say, we want to let the music do the talking. We don't want to move too much. We don't want to let our personalities get involved. And I think that's craziness, but blues doesn't do that. When I saw Wolf and Muddy, they threw themselves 100% into the music without holding back. And that was very attractive to me for blues. And so
Corky Siegel, what led you to give up the saxophone, if you actually gave it up, and pick up the harmonica?
Well, you almost answered the question right there. The saxophone did not fit in my pocket. And it was heavy when I put it down. And the harmonica was light, and I was able to put it in my pocket. That was the main thing. I'm a very practical guy.
Do you have any friends and other musicians that you want to share some stuff about? I'm thinking about the time you were at the Heartland Cafe, and you were there with Country Joe McDonald of Country Joe and the Fish. And I just remembered that while we were talking.
The whole band.
I remember meeting him. I remember him playing at the Finnish Hall in Berkeley in like 64 or 5, and him being around political stuff. He was a political guy. Is he still alive?
Yeah, I see him. Well, I haven't seen him for about a couple months, but I used to do a Zoom with him every week.
Well, say hi and tell him I'd love to have him on this show.
Great.
So let's go back one more time and just remind people that one of the reasons that you're on Live from the Heartland now is because we're going to celebrate Chicago music legend Corky Siegel's 80th birthday at City Winery, 1200 West Randolph, Sunday, 7 p.m. That's Sunday, October 22nd. And you tell us, Corky, why people should come.
Oh, well, there's still seats available, which is a good reason to come. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a good reason to come if there were no seats. But well, chamber blues specifically, there is literally, and I could say this straight face, there is absolutely nothing like it in the world.
That's for sure.
Certainly, every musician is unique. So you could say that really about every musician. There's nothing like Jim Galleretto, my saxophone buddy, or Ernie Watts. There's nothing like them. But chamber blues, you can't hear anything that is even distantly like chamber blues unless you hear chamber blues. So we could only be in one place at one time. I'm 80 years old. I'm not saying anything else after that. So you have a chance to hear chamber blues. It'll be an experience like you've never heard. Boom.
Well, I hope I get there, Corky. I haven't got a ticket yet, but I imagine I could weasel my way in.
I bet you could.
And I'm looking forward to it.
By the way, you are looking really good.
Well, I got to tell you that I have a million secrets, but the one that I think has been really a good one is I go to the McGaw-Y in Evanston 4 days a week right now in the pool at 7:30 in the morning. And I basically run in the deep water. And they actually play music. Sometimes Mahalia Jackson. This morning they were playing Another Man Done Gone to the County Farm. I think it was Muddy Waters. So these lifeguards have got music set up. And I don't swim because I have crashed shoulders, but I dance in the pool. I run in the pool.
I was going to say you use your little inflatable wings, right?
Well, I don't use those. I got enough on me to float a little bit. So I got goggles. I'm underwater. You look pretty good yourself. So it's enough of this mutual admiration stuff going on. I'm looking forward to you seeing you, and I miss seeing you. I used to see you and Holly all the time at the Heartland Cafe. And I got a million stories popping in my head, but that's enough. There's Holly. It's great to see you.
Good to see you too. We miss you.
It's good.
Corky and I used to swim at the YMCA in Evanston twice a week. but we've stopped. We should
Now we-
probably go back.
Now we walk like at least a half hour to an hour every day. We do our resistant bands every other day when we can, and we do some yoga, and we do meditation almost every day.
You guys keep it up, and I'll look forward to seeing you real soon, both of you.
Okay,
thank
and
you.
a shout out to Alvina.
All right, that's a little secret. We both know this woman, Alvina, who's a wonderful woman.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Take care.
Adios. We'll see you.
Adios.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, everybody, we want to thank all of you for tuning in to Live from the Heartland, or however you're getting it, CAN TV, youtube.com/Heartland Media, WLUW, Google and Spotify podcasts. There's a lot of challenges to all of us out there in the world right now. And so more than ever, I want to encourage you all to do good in the world. The world needs every bit of good that you do, that Corky does, that I do, that Thom Clark does, that Katie Hogan does, those of you who know from the show. Thanks to all the people who make the show possible, our guest Corky Siegel, our guest Thom Clark, our engineer Hal James, our producers Lynn Orman, Thom Clark, and Katie Hogan. See you next week. All power to the people. Over and out.
Are you doing the best you can? Over the mountain, under the big blue sky, you got a dream awaiting. I can see it in your eye. It may not come easy, but you know you've got a friend. I'll be by your side the entire ride. Just let me hear you say amen. Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing? Are you doing the best you can? Tout donne, est-ce que tu donnes le meilleur de toi-même parce que tu l'aimes? Tu donnes, est-ce que tu donnes le meilleur de toi-même si tu l'aimes? Tu donnes, est-ce que tu donnes le meilleur de toi-même quand tu l'aimes? Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing?